Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay. Let's hop across the pond. Let me check my sound before I do anything else. We had a really large crowd on that other show. Maybe that crowd will show up again. Good, the world is good. And I know I don't say this every show, but bake this into the cake that I appreciate all the help that you guys give to the show. Whether that's liking, sharing, patron, cash, super chat. It's not super chat. I thought it was called super cash, but super chat. Or just sharing the videos. All of those things help the show, including sending me content, because I'm about to do a story now for something that somebody sent me, or the very least showed up in my Twitter feed. My original story was going to be about what was taking place with Brexit. Theresa May jumped across, I guess you can say, went to Brussels, took a train ride to Brussels. I don't know if she took a train ride. When I'm there, I take a train ride. But she was in Brussels talking to many of the other 27 nations that make up the EU. In a nutshell, Theresa May didn't have a white paper on what she wanted, essentially her idea, or the UK's government's main idea for the Brexit negotiation. But they were able to make a little headway on some things, but they said there were wide gaps that they haven't necessarily been able to come to head on, which makes the case for a Brexit without a deal more likely, which means that the UK government, I'll just say it makes Brexit without a deal more likely. That said, there's something that's more interesting that popped up. So the British government has something called the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. They're kind of like the Inspector General in the United States. That agency has done a damning report on the British government's essentially actions and roles in assisting the United States, or in some cases participating in renditions and torture. Breaking British law to participate in torture. They released a report on this that I put at the bottom for you to see for yourself. I'm going to have to break this up into two camps because this page, the report, is a little bit long and I need to read through all of it. The part that I do want to talk about, however, first is Theresa May's hobbling this report. Look, you know, my basic argument is always, if we are philosophically bound to be in charge of our government, meaning we are responsible for what our government does, then you need to know what they're doing. And if your government is doing these kind of black ops outside of your eyeshot, if it's murdering people outside of your eyeshot, and yet every bullet that's fired is done in your name, well, that's somewhat of a problem. Because the consequences that hit you, you don't even know that those things are consequences from the actions that your government had been taking. It's all new to you. Your government is doing things in the shadows. Those things need to come to light for you to have any real idea, or really any real ability to control the behavior of your particular government. Theresa May hobbled this report, and yet this report came out anyway, with damning findings that probably would have been worse if she wouldn't necessarily have interceded in this way. And why do I think she interceded in the way? Because they put it in the report. They had to put into the report how the Prime Minister took amazing steps in order to prevent them from talking to certain people and to prevent anybody from potentially being prosecuted for the crimes that were committed during the Blair and Gordon Brown era of government. This first review is going to focus more so on the role that Theresa May played in preventing this report from coming to light, or at the very least I can say hobbling aspects of this report. The second part of this I'm going to do in a separate video is going to be about the report itself, some of the findings. This is Craig Murray. Craig Murray is absolutely awesome. I like the guy. Blair and Brown government gory with torture. Even I was taken aback by the sheer scale of the British active involvement in extraordinary rendition revealed by yesterday's report of Parliament Intelligence and Security Committee. Dominic Grieve and the committee deserve congratulations for their honesty, integrity, and above all, persistence. It is plain from the report 10 Downing Street did everything possible to handicap the work of the committee. Most crucially, they were allowed only to interview extremely senior civil servants and not allowed to interview those actively engaged in the torture and the rendition program. Again, if you really want to get to the bottom of something, you let an investigation take place. Hobbling the investigation and then turning around and saying, see, we've had the investigation. That's politics, but that's not really an honest way of going about an investigation. And this agency wasn't necessarily happy with what the government was doing here. Look at right here. They put out a press release. June 26. The chairman of the Intelligence Service and Security Committee of Parliament, Honorable Dominic Grieve, has today issued the following statement. I have seen the allegations this morning that the United States has censored our report on detention and rendition, which we will be publishing on Thursday. I am exceptionally making a comment ahead of the publication of the report because I believe that otherwise we risk attention being distracted from the key headlines of this report. The first point to make is that the committee has agreed to redact just one word of 300 pages to meet a U.S. security concern. On Thursday, I will happily point to you where the asterisks are in the report, and you can see for yourself that it is not a central issue nor a controversial issue. The committee does not agree to redact materials in its report on the grounds of embarrassment to anyone, so I can assure you that the United States has not made wholesale redactions to the report as suggested. The second point I wish to make is that I find it unacceptable that the government has briefed the media on our reports before they were published. These are not government reports to trail or leak as they wish. The government is, exceptionally, given sight of the reports ahead of the publication so that they can check there is nothing in them that would harm the UK national reports so as to draw the sting on Thursday. I believe that the reports make a very strong statement, and I hope that the attention will be rightly focused on that and there will be no further attempts to distract from it. The UK government was assisting in torturing human beings, breaking human beings apart. In many cases, they knew that the rendition was taking place. They knew that the people were being mistreated. And even worse, information was being pulled from people that were being tortured, that the UK knew was being tortured, and took an active policy in allowing that to take place. The UK has done bad things. And they've done bad things at the behest of the United States government. Let's keep going. Theresa May specifically and deliberately ruled out the committee from questioning any official who might be placed at risk of criminal proceedings. See paragraph 11 of the report. The determination of the government to protect those who were complicit in torture tells us much more about the future intentions than a fake apology. What do I always say? That the UK, we're like their darker brother? We did the same thing. We did the same thing. When Obama took office, he said we're looking forward and not looking backwards. That is literally whitewashing all of the crimes of the previous administration. We're not looking forward. We're looking forward. We're not looking back. So the president of the United States admitting to torture, we're just looking forward. The president of the United States invading the country on the premise of a lie, on an absolute outright lie, looking forward. No consequence. George Bush is out there finger painting right now. There are 1 million people that are no longer on this globe for his actions. And he's walking the face of the earth. And Tony Blair in the same way. These people should be prosecuted. And you're protecting them. I expect more out of you. I guess that's what my annoyance with this is. I expect far more out of the UK than I do the United States. We're more bought. We're less rational. Apparently we're not the only one. That being said though, Grieve did this report. And he did this report with a certain amount of integrity. And I say that to say, even putting in the fact that he was hobbled in doing the report, I'm trying to access these witnesses and the government is preventing me from doing this. He did what he could. Good job. In fact, it is impossible to read paragraph 9 through 14 without being astonished at the sheer audacity of Theresa May's attempts to obstruct the inquiry. They are allowed to interview 4 out of 23 requested witnesses, and those were not allowed to talk about the specifics of the operations in which they were involved, nor fill in the gaps in the timeline. If the UK had a genuinely free media, this executive obstruction of the inquiry would be the lead story. Instead, it's not mentioned in any corporate or state media, despite the committee report containing firm protests. The committee considered this denial of access to witnesses to be incompatible with the terms under which the ISC has agreed to conduct the inquiry. We were adamant that we must hear from officers who were involved at the time, as this was essential if the inquiry was to be thorough and comprehensive and be in a position to reach properly considered, balanced, and fair views about the facts. The committee considered that the terms and conditions imposed by the Prime Minister were such that it would be unable to conduct an authoritative inquiry and produce a credible report. We therefore ask the Prime Minister to reconsider on the 23rd of March 2017. No response has been received. The committee has therefore concluded, reluctantly, that it must draw the line under the inquiry. This is regrettable. That's damning. The Prime Minister has prevented us from actually getting to the conclusions that we needed to reach. This is the best that we can do under the constraints of Prime Minister Theresa May. In an odd way, protecting the Brown and Blair government. Let's keep going. And there's another reason for this, by the way, and I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the reason why it was done in the U.S. You're not going to like the reason, but the reason is real. Let's keep going. Despite being hamstrung by the government, the committee managed thorough, exhaustive research of classified documents to pull together evidence of British involvement in extraordinary rendition and mistreatment of detainees, intelligence, and mistreatment of detainees on a massive scale. The committee found 596 individual documented incidents of the security services obtaining intelligence, quote-unquote, from detainee interrogations involving torture or severe mistreatment, ranging from 2 incidents of direct involvement, 13 to 15 of actual being in the room, though those were the United States or other authorities admitted to torture, and those were detained, those were where the detainee told the officers they had been tortured. They found 3 instances where the UK had paid for the rendition flights. The UK was involved, either in torture or rendition, or in situations where they knew the person was being tortured or mistreated, and they got the information from those people and went skipping along. Is that against your law? And if it is, should there be consequences for it? My own evidence to the committee focused on the overarching policy framework, and specifically the fact that Jack Straw and Richard Dearlove had agreed to deliberate and considered policy of obtaining intelligence through torture. The report includes disappointingly little of my evidence, as the committee has taken a very narrow view of its remit to oversee the intelligence agencies. This is only part of my evidence included. This was not unique to the agencies. Their sponsoring departments appear to have adopted the same approach. We heard evidence from the former FCO official Craig Murray, who suggested that there was a deliberate policy of not committing the discussion on receipt of intelligence through torture to paper in the Foreign Office. Let me read that again. I think that sounds a little weird to me. Who suggested that there was a deliberate policy of not committing the discussion on receipt of intelligence through torture to paper in the Foreign Office. In July 2004, when he was ambassador to Tashkent, he raised concerns about the use of Uzbek intelligence derived from the torture and formal exchange of telegrams with the FCO. Mr. Murray drew our attention to the FCO documents from the same time, which we have seen, one of which referred to meetings to look at conditions. Jesus Christ, it's hard to read. Meetings to look at conditions of receipt of intelligence as a general issue. He told us that the meeting specifically discussed the receipt of intelligence under torture from Uzbekistan, and were absolutely key to the formation of policy on extraordinary rendition of intelligence. Mr. Murray told us that he had given evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee about they sought the documents from the FCO, which replied that the meetings were informal meetings and were not minuted. He went on to say that the idea that you have regular meetings convened at director level, convened by the Director of Security and Intelligence, where you are discussing the receipt of intelligence from torture, and you do not minute those meetings, is an impossibility, unless an actual decision to instruction not to minute the meetings have been given. Were it not for me and my bloody-mindedness, you would never know that those meetings had happened. Nobody would ever know that those meetings had happened. We note that we have not seen minutes of the meetings either. This causes us great concern. Polity's discussions on such an important issue should have been minuted. We support Mr. Murray's own conclusion that were it not for his actions, these matters may never have come to light. Murray is making a point that, look, these guys are getting information, and in normal situations, they would write down the minutes for the stuff. You would have somebody recording what's taking place. It's a governmental office. This is not an individual running an office. This is a governmental process. It's a rules-based process. These are human beings. It's not... I'm trying to make the point that From the standpoint of government, this stuff needs to be recorded and written down because people need to have some level of accountability of what you're doing in your office. They're making a point that they made a specific, conscious, deliberate decision not to write down certain minutes when the information was achieved through torture because they didn't want to write the fact that they received the information through torture. They knew what they were doing. That's his point. Murray is making a point that they knew that they were doing. They knew where this information was coming from, and they knew how this information was being received. And they took it anyway and didn't write it down in some weird way of showing evidence of guilt. That's amazing. Murray said this goes further than that, but let's keep going. Jack Straw, to this day, denies knowledge and involvement and famously told Parliament that the whole story about rendition and torture was a conspiracy theory. He lied to Parliament! He lied to Parliament. Just like the CIA spooks go in front of Congress and lie, he lied to Parliament. He lied through his teeth. Unless we all start to believe in conspiracy theories that the officials are lying, that I am lying, that behind this there was some kind of secret state which is in league with some dark forces in the United States, and also let me say we believe that Secretary Rice is lying, there's simply no truth to the claims that the United Kingdom has been involved in rendition, full stop. Because we have not been, and so what on earth a judicial inquiry would start to do, I have no idea. I do not think it would be justified. I'm the goddamn Pope. We're Catholics. We're Catholic priests. Why on earth do you think we would ever touch kids? We believe in Jesus. We would never touch kids. Never do that. And I believe as a Catholic priest that an inquiry into us touching kids would be unnecessary because I have no idea what that inquiry would do. As you know, a lot of those guys are pedophiles. I'm making the point that the guy, you would say that. In fact, I strongly recommend you read the whole Harris transcript from Q20 to Q51 in which Jack Straw carries out the most sustained bravura, well, in my head it would be bravado, but I know what he's trying to say, bravura performance of lying to Parliament in modern history. The ISC report makes plain he was repeatedly involved in direct authorizations of rendition operations while denying to Parliament they ever existed in such operations. It is illegal to lie to Parliament. I'm asking. I don't know. Is it illegal? Is it illegal for a person to get in front of Parliament and flagrantly lie? And if so, you have a report, non-biased, even hobbled by the Prime Minister. You can read it for yourself as a PDF that clearly gets across that the guy was lying. You were involved in renditions. You did know that there were people being broken and beaten. You did understand that some of the information that you were getting were coming from people that were being broken and beaten and tortured. You didn't need a quote-unquote deep state for this stuff to take place, and making this stuff like it's some kind of conspiracy theory is somewhat of a ditch. The truth of the matter is that this report is right. These people were involved in this stuff. And even to the degree that Theresa May hobbled the report, it became very clear that the UK was far more involved than what they wanted to honestly admit. This report is awesome. And I want to read one more part of this report that he didn't include. Well, it's right here. For over a decade now, the British government, be it red Tory or blue Tory, has been refusing calls for a proper public inquiry into the collusion with torture. The ISC report was meant to stand in place of such an inquiry, but all it has done is reveal that there was a huge amount of complicity and torture, much more than has been realized, which is the ISC states it was precluded from properly investigating because of government restrictions on its operations. It also concluded in a separate report on the current issues that it is unable to state categorically that these practices have stopped. Not only was the British government working with the United States in renditioning and torture, they don't know if the process has even stopped. You have a Trump administration. Trump was okay with torture. How do you know they're not torturing people now? The Obama administration was still under rendition. How do you know that this government is not working with Trump now doing the same practice and procedures? My point is you don't. My point is you don't. Let's look at one of the sections in the report, because I found this section amazing. He recommended reading 9 through 10, so let's do that. It's my channel, why not? Analysis of the primary material and preparations for evidence sessions took place through 2015, and once the new committee was in place after 2015 general election, ministers, NGOs, former members of staff who came forward on their own volition to provide independent evidence to the committee, and other witnesses took place in late 2015 throughout 2016 and into 2017. By July 2016, the committee considered that it had covered the breadth of the inquiry but now needed to examine certain matter in detail. This, the committee agreed, could only be done by taking evidence from those who had been on the ground at the time. The agency head had committed a great deal of time and effort to answer our questions. However, inevitably, they could answer only to the extent of their knowledge, as they were not involved at the relevant time. We make no criticism whatsoever in this regard. The committee therefore considered that it was essential to talk to witnesses who had personal knowledge of events at the time. A list of required witnesses from SIS, in first instance, was provided by HMG in July 2016, and the intention was to begin to take evidence from them later that year. It's logical. Makes perfect sense. We're trying to have an investigation. We're trying to get to the bottom of what happened. What was the role of the UK's government in regards to this extraordinary rendition and torture? And in order to know this, we need to talk to the people who are working in those systems. Logical. Extremely logical. We want to get to the bottom of it. Let's keep going. However, the government's response in September 2016 was that the committee could not take evidence from officers who were junior at the time. HMG insisted that the inquiry should be conducted in accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding. The Memorandum of Understanding, which governs the working relationship between ISG and the government, refers to the committee taking evidence from senior officials. This encompasses senior civil servants. Many of those the committee was seeking to interview had reached that level during the agency's careers. Furthermore, when the cabinet secretary wrote to the chair of the committee at the very outset of the inquiry in December 2013, he specifically said that it was open to the committee as it wishes to take evidence from current and former agent heads, other officials from the agencies or relevant departments, potentially 1 or 2 former UK detainees, and relevant former ministers and officials. Meaning, when this inquiry was started, they were getting broad powers to essentially interview who they wanted. The point of it was, look, figure out what took place. Have at it. You're able to interview all of these people, have at it. And Theresa May says, yeah, no. You can only interview people who are seniors. Well, wait a minute. There might have been people who we needed to interview. Essentially, you're bleeding out evidence that we need. And you're stopping us from getting that particular evidence. It's an amazing thing. Let's keep going. The committee escalated the matter to the Prime Minister, making these points. Her response set out a number of concerns, the first being that there was legal uncertainty over the protection that would be afforded to officers appearing as witnesses before the committee. We don't want any charges pressed if somebody says something that they did that was illegal. She therefore ruled out the committee's taking evidence from officers who have been subject to civil or criminal proceedings. This is surprising since the Justice and Security Act of 2013 states that evidence given by a witness before the ISG may not be used in any civil or disciplinary proceedings and may not be used against the person in any criminal proceedings. The committee considers this to be sufficient protection for such witnesses, as indeed did the government and the agencies at the time of the passage of the Justice and Security Bill. You have limited immunity if you talk to us. Meaning, if you're talking to us, none of what you tell us can be used against you. Meaning, there is no reason for you not to talk to us. Theresa May is essentially covering some people's ass. If they now consider this protection to be inadequate, this will indicate a failure in the legislation which should be rectified as a matter of urgency. If you don't allow us to talk to these people because you believe that security concerns are inadequate to deal with potential liability, then you need to fix that. Because ultimately, we can't get to the bottom of what we need to get to the bottom of if you're blocking us from actually talking to the witnesses who were there. Understand what they're saying. This is a big deal. And they're putting this in the report itself. Think of it for the moment. A system is set up where your government is being inspected. Because ultimately, you need to know what your government is doing. It's not enough for you to have a government. You also need to know what is taking place. You need an adequate interrogation of the procedures and the policies and the things that your government has done. How can you make decisions? How can you make changes if you don't know what those things are? They came up with a process of saying, look, we're going to give certain protections to people, so when those people are talking to us, those people can't necessarily be they say can't be used against them. Theresa May is like, whoa, we don't know the legalities of the stuff. And he's making the point that's a nonsense argument, because from a legality standpoint, they're protected. Just by very act of talking to us, to some degree, they have some level of protection. I find this to be amazing. And the guy's making a point like, look, if what Theresa May is saying is right, then they need to change the legislation to allow these people more protection, because we need to get to the bottom of this investigation. What role do we have to play in the extraordinary rendition? What role do we have to play in the torture? You're blocking us from getting to the bottom of what the government was doing. I love this. I love the fact that he put this in a report. What I don't want is you get a report, the government says there's a report that points to it, and you miss all of the context and the granular context that the government itself, the Theresa May government, was working to hobble the report. I like the fact that he put it in. Let's keep going. The Prime Minister also said it was not appropriate for a parliamentary committee to request formal evidence from staff who were junior at the time of the events in question, regardless of the position they may now hold. This may be the case for select committees, but the ISC is not a select committee. It is quite deliberately has greater powers and protections in recognition of the fact that it has sole responsibility for oversight of intelligence matters. Furthermore, in respect of this inquiry, the ISC sought and thought it had been granted access to officials beyond agency heads. The restrictions on the ground of seniority and involvement in the proceedings, when taken together, will reduce the list of witnesses to 4. It reduces the list of witnesses to 4. The committee had requested initially access to 23 SIS witnesses and intended to request access to a similar number of MI5 witnesses. There was, however, a further restriction. The Prime Minister stipulated that even those witnesses the committee was allowed to access to would not be allowed to talk about the specifics of the operations in which they were involved, nor fill in any gaps in the timeline of events, and the committee could not quote their evidence in its report. Theresa May, ladies and gentlemen, the protector of torturers. The protector of torturers. That's amazing. That's utterly amazing. So Theresa May hobbles the report, and even with the hobble report, they get across that the UK was involved in torture and in rendition policy. That is amazing. That report is a bombshell. That report should have been on the front page of the news in the UK today. Apparently it was not. So I will leave this here. I have others that I want to do, but I definitely wanted to show this one. Winger, the Pentagon cannot account for more than $21 trillion, almost as much as our national debt. Yes, Winger, that is true. You know, I did a report saying that the Pentagon had lost track of like $5 trillion in 2015. That number is massive. Like, our national debt is $21 trillion. That number is mind-blowing. That number is mind-blowing. Think of what you could have gotten for that money versus what you actually did get for that money. If that doesn't piss you off, I don't know what will. You could have had a Hyperloop going from Virginia to California. Hyperloop. It would have been fucking awesome. You could have had a maglev train going from Virginia to California. Hell, Virginia to New York. Hell, New York to Florida. I'm just making a point to you that for $21 trillion, what could you have gotten for that money versus what you actually have for that money? Invaded a country, killed 1 million people, used the military as if it was this kind of jobs program. Well, you have jobs killing people and paying a bunch of people money to create bombs and missiles and jets and planes. Isn't that the new head of the CIA now? Yeah. Yeah, the woman who was head of the black site at Bloody Gina Haspel. Regina Haspel. She's now head of the CIA. We have a torturer ahead of the CIA. Do you know that if she steps foot in Europe, she could be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court? Amazing. And that woman is the head of the CIA. Hey, at least she's honest. At least she's honest. You know what you're getting when you put her in that office. You know what you're getting. All right, I'm going to end this because I have another one I want to do about actually Brexit. This report is a big deal. I'm going to read this report tonight. I've read this particular section and I was going through some of it, but I don't have enough time to actually go through the entire report. Tomorrow, I am going to do a section dealing with what was taking place, because it's one thing to say Theresa May was hobbling the report. It's another thing to say what exactly was she hobbling. Now, one last point. Part of the reason that they do this is because they want a certain amount of solidarity into the soldiers and the troops who back them up. If the government tells them to do something nasty and disgusting and repugnant and disastrous, they want them to be able to still do those things, and they want to believe, or they want those people to believe that in any situation, even if we're telling you to do something illegal, we still want you to do it, and we will back you up after you do it. Part of the reason that Obama wasn't necessarily willing to prosecute the people in the CIA, I suspect, had more to do with, I need these people to back me up, and I need these people to do repugnant things across the globe, and if I start prosecuting them, maybe they will be less likely to do those things. From the standpoint of us, however, we want them to be less likely to do those things. I want them to be less likely to torture. I want them to be terrified that if they do those things, that there's going to be a public going after them because they're breaking the law. In the same way we go after people who are smoking pot or something, or immigrants. I want them to be terrified of doing those things. That's the point of prosecution. Well, the Prime Minister has a different modus operandi. And in her case, she wants to protect the torturers. She wants to protect the torturers. All right. I hear the chant, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn. The Pentagon had record expenditures on 9/11 with backup records in Building 7 at Washington Trade Center. Both records Trove destroyed in 9/11. Coincidence? Hey, it's also a coincidence on the day before 9/11. What's his name comes out? Rumsfeld comes out and says, hey, we've lost trace of like $3 trillion. Don't know where it went. That video always amazes me because nobody finds it interesting that he said that. $3 trillion. Fucking evaporated. Then the day after. Sadly, most UK public are propagandized by right-wing press. Oh, and also keep in mind the control of the press, like D letters or D notices, where you essentially ward the press off of talking about certain issues. Look, I would say this. The guy who wrote this report, or the committee that wrote this report, good job under difficult situations. Your Prime Minister clearly was not on board in learning what was taking place, and you may even make an argument that you know what's taking place because it may still continually be taking place. So, I will end this here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Great report and good job. And the name of this is the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. Good fucking job. If Corbyn gets in office, let these people do their work and prosecute Blair and whoever else was involved in that process. That's my suggestion. We have no hope of getting anything like that in the United States. We don't even remember the fact that 9/11 took place or Iraq took place. So, I just hope you're better. That's all. Either way, good report and good try. This one has gone a bit long, but I kind of wanted to read through it so people would have a contextual understanding of what this report, or at the very least, this section of the report was about. Thanks, guys.